Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing. Hi Adam, it's great to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. Very busy, but yeah, very good.
Good. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about you, please, Adam?
Yeah, my name is Adam Thomas. I've been designing accessible kitchens for the best part, well, just over 40 years, 41 years. I was in the kitchen industry for a year and a half before I had a road traffic accident. And I was very lucky to have an employer that would consider employing me after being paralysed. And he made his showroom fully accessible back in 1981, and I've carried on really working with him for the next sort of 30 odd years.
Fantastic. And what is it that you do now? What do you do? Because I know you do a whole range of different things, don't you?
Yeah, so I mean, I've really sort of branched out a bit more. So I'm now sort of more in consultancy and also education and teaching or lecturing. I run my own business where I take on private clients and I design one-off bespoke designs for them. I also sort of look at architect plans for them and sort of make advice. Again, through my own personal experience of being a wheelchair user, I've got a good sort of conceptual space when I can look at a plan, sort of very easily visualize whether a bathroom's big enough, a kitchen's big enough, etc. Obviously, I specialize in kitchens. And I've recently, over the last 4.5 years, I was asked by a major, the biggest privately owned kitchen company in Britain, a company called Symphony, to design them a fully accessible range of furniture. And I've worked with them over the last 4.5 years, sort of developing a product sort of based on my previous knowledge and design work, and sort of design ideas that I came up with to solve clients' issues over the last sort of 30, 40 years. And the fantastic thing is I've always sort of believed in social housing, and the market I was in was always for very bespoke, should we say, for the compensation market, catastrophic injury. But I wanted to sort of, I couldn't understand why it was never possible to sort of roll out some of my ideas on mass production, and which would then obviously enable to get the prices to come right down. And Symphony have given me that opportunity. And we've now, between us, we worked on this range that we've called Freedom. And we launched that about sort of a soft launch about 2 years ago. And we're working with showrooms now around the country to actually put the product in. So a disabled person now can actually go to a Symphony Freedom dealer, and they will get the same level of service if you're a non-disabled person. And part of the setup is that all the showrooms have to be fully accessible. They have to have accessible parking, accessible loos. The staff have to be equality trained, and I have to train them in accessible design, which is going to be an ongoing process.
Wow, that's fantastic. So completely changing the shape of it, really.
Yeah.
Exciting.
And this was, I mean, people spend a lot of money on kitchens, and up until sort of 3-4 years ago when Symphony did this, there was nowhere where a disabled person could go for specialist knowledge, but equally be treated as though they don't have, if you're spending 20 grand, 15 grand, whatever your budget is, to then have to go and basically reinvent the wheel and basically go back to basics to teach those designers the most basic, simple tasks. Whereas now the designers actually know what questions to ask. They feel confident in working with disabled people, and it cuts a lot of that grief and worry out of the process.
And that's so important on so many levels, isn't it? It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So when we were chatting the other day, you were talking about the concept of universal rather than accessible, and I'd really like to understand what you mean by that. Can you explain it for us?
Yeah. Well, for 25 years, I sort of banged on about accessible design and accessible kitchens and how we needed them. And if you designed a kitchen correctly for a disabled person that was fully accessible for them, it should be accessible for everyone. But on the whole, developers weren't interested in putting in accessible kitchens. They automatically think if you do an accessible kitchen, it's going to cost twice the price. It's a limited market, so why do it?
And that it's going to be ugly, I think, is the other.
Yes, quite possibly,
well. Yeah.
So, and a lot of them, to be fair, over the years are, because they basically use very inferior products. They use very basic colours. They don't sort of tend to go with the standard trends. And again, a lot of the manufacturers, they have their standard range, and then they have the accessible range, which is limited colours, etc. And this is the beauty of Symphony. It's been brought into the main retail branding, so it just slots in with all the standard retail kitchens. But going back to accessible and universal, but I found as soon as I started using the phrase universal design, universal means that everyone can use it. And if you design a kitchen correctly, by its very nature, everyone should use it. Another form that people are using is multi-generational, which basically means that you can be born, you can start using a kitchen when you're 4 or 5 years old, and you can use it when you're 84 years old. And that's the same principle, but universal I think it's like is a softer idea, and it basically just universal means that everyone can use the kitchen.
It's a much better term, isn't it? I think it's.
Yeah, I think it is, and the great thing is now that Symphony and hopefully other manufacturers will be as well, will be introducing a range that everyone can use, and again, it doesn't. And this is the great thing with the Freedom range, we've got ideas in there that we're really looking into what I call future proofing. So you could be, for instance, coming up towards the end of your career, you're fit and able, you're coming up to 65 or whatever, you're either downsizing or you're coming up to retirement. So you're always going to do your lovely bathroom and do your lovely kitchen up, for argument's sake. Think about, yes, you might be fit now, but how are you going to be in another 5, 10, 15 years time? This kitchen that you're doing potentially, unless you're going to move, is you want to last you out. So you want to future proof it. Now, to future proof a kitchen doesn't cost a penny more. Future proofing comes down to good design and having sort of some good ideas, which potentially we can touch on.
Yeah, what sort of things would you
later?
Yeah, what sort of things would you say in there?
Well, I mean, there's many things. I mean, for instance, you don't design ranges because that means you've got to bend down to your ankles. You might be able to bend down to your ankles to lift out a casserole dish now, but are you going to be able to in 10, 15 years time? Build ovens at the correct height so you don't have to bend. Don't design kitchens with lots of hinged doors everywhere, because again, you've got to bend to get down to reach into the cupboard.
So what would you have rather than a hinged door? What would you have?
You'd have pull-out drawers.
Right, okay.
So everything pulls out towards you, so you're not having to bend down so low it means you don't have to bend down to the back of cupboards. Don't just have a larder unit with a hinged door with loads of shelves, because again, you can't reach into the back so easily. It means you can't reach as high and or as low, but have drawers that pull out. It really doesn't add very much onto the price of the unit, but the accessibility factor is massive. So it's things like that. Think about worktops with raised lips on the front edge. Because as you get older people or somebody who gets wobbly on their feet, it's a really great thing to hold on to.
Oh, we see. So you use it actually for gripping rather. Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's for gripping, but equally it's for if you have a spillage, it keeps the fluid on the worktop, so you don't have to start bending down again. 80% of all falls in a kitchen are caused by bending.
Okay.
So if you can design out bending, then all of a sudden you're making a kitchen accessible for a massive sway of people.
And I think everyone's perception when we talk about disabled people is that they're wheelchair users, and that's definitely not true, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's a relatively small proportion of the 13.8 million, but we are talking 13.8 million in a whatever it is, 67,000 or whatever at the moment, which is basically 1 in 5 of the population has some form of impairment. And again, when I had my injury at 17, out of 100 friends, I was the only one who was out, should we say, on being a disabled person. I was the only one who identified themselves as a disabled person. Now at sort of my late 50s, that figure is up to about 40%. And as I get older and as they get older, that figure's going to go increase.
Mm.
So you want to be designing ideas in it. And again, if we go back to the idea of universal design, if we can put certain things in designs that actually don't cost a penny more, but just we're positioning the oven in correct heights and positions and designing in the right appliances, it means that everyone's going to be able to use it for a lot longer without then having to rip out the kitchen in another 10, 15 years time.
Mm-hmm. And they're really, if you're doing a kitchen refurb anyway, which the majority of property investors and developers will do, either they're putting a new kitchen in because it's building something from the ground, or they're refurbing a property, then actually some of those simple things that you said then are not that much more expensive to put in as you go, whereas everyone's perception is that that's going to be a really great cost to do.
Yes, it is. I mean, obviously a unit with drawers is going to cost more than a unit with 2 hinge doors. But if you're cutting out 3/4 of your potential market, why do it? Why put in a built under oven? Because everyone hates built under ovens. And the only reason actually developers do put in built under ovens is because they don't make the kitchens too small.
Yeah.
But presuming the kitchen is of a decent size, you put an oven. But even you can still design fully universal, accessible kitchens in very small spaces using the correct products at the correct height.
And so you touched on space there, and I guess that is an issue, isn't it? That you maybe need slightly larger space to make the kitchen properly universal. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I work a lot with what used to be called DocM, which I'm sure any developers or people listening will know what that is. It's now actually not DocM anymore, it's ADM, approved DocM. And you can actually get a 1-bed DocM kitchen into a space of 2805 millimeters by 3.6 meters. So that's it's a really
quite a small kitchen,
small space. And you can make it totally compliant in that space, as long as I put a caveat that the doors and windows go in the right place.
Right.
So, but again, that's talking for a full wheelchair user accessible kitchen.
Wow.
Which is still a small space. Yeah. So you don't necessarily have to have huge spaces. The really important thing is making sure doors and windows are in the right place. And that's one of the sort of tips I'll be giving to property investors and or developers and or if you're building a new place. You really have to know and think about where things like doors and windows are going to be positioned. In
what way? What do you mean by that?
Well, look, because one of the basic things that when you first go and look at a property, particularly for a wheelchair user, but again, this is the general for everyone, but particularly for wheelchair users or a disabled person who might have multiple sclerosis or somebody who's got Parkinson's or an amputee or somebody who's wobbly on their feet or an older person with arthritis, you must be able to have oven, hob and sink on the same run. That's the number one design principle. You must have oven, hob and sink on the same run.
So when you say on the same run, you mean on the same piece of straight work surface?
It doesn't have to be on straight. It can be a straight run. It can be an L shape. It can be a U shape.
Right.
It can be a U shape with the peninsula coming back into the room. But you must be able to get something from the oven onto the worktop and round to the sink without ever having to lift it.
Right.
So if you've got a galley kitchen, yes, you can have a galley kitchen, but you must make sure the oven, hob and sink are on one side. And that way, obviously, then you can still get something from the oven and or the hob to the sink without ever having to carry anything.
Right.
Because again, that's if you're designing it so you've got the sink on one area and then you've got to lift it across an open door or whatever, that's when accidents, serious burns and scalds can happen.
And so that's why where your door and window positions need to be around the work.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. To make sure.
So ideally, if you imagine a rectangle, you want the door to be in the middle of one of the short walls.
Right. Okay.
So then you can have a U shape going up a long wall, along the short wall, and down the other long wall. And that way you can get. But if you put the door into the room, if you turn that rectangle round and put the door in one of the long walls, it totally screws up the whole design. So it's that basic. but it's getting architects to understand those basic principles. I mean, there's a lot of other, which we wouldn't really have time to go into now.
Of course not, no.
But there's other things like that. And again, another massive one, which is so simple, is boiler positioning. Again, because if we're talking wheelchair accessible, Doc M states that the leg space has to be on one rise and fall. So the hob and the sink is on one rise and fall, or on one, if it's going to be not rise and fall, but just a worktop with leg space, it still has to be non-broken. So you can't put an appliance in or a units in between the hob and the sink.
Right.
And that's stated in Doc M. But often when I see an architect's plan and it comes down to me, then the only place, for instance, to put the rise and fall, that's where they've shown the boiler.
Right.
If they only knew that you don't put where the obvious place to either put a right angle rise and fall or the right angle leg space, or to put a straight run rise and fall or straight run is, don't put the boiler there.
When you talk about rise and fall, you're talking about a work surface that actually
yes.
rises, lifts and lowers, aren't you? Yeah. So
which is at one end of the scale of universal. I mean, if you really wanted to be universal, you would be doing that, but then there's obviously huge cost factors. But the great thing, I did some work for David Bonnet Associates when they were working on the Olympic Village, and we came up with a design concept, or I came up with a design concept really for housing associations, because one of my bugbears is wastage, and it's been for so long. And I used to, well, the actual example is I went into a brand new built block of flats, and when they started moving tenants in, down in South London, they started moving tenants in, and one by one they had to rip out these brand new kitchens because none of the clients could use them, because everything had been put in at the wrong heights. Wall units had been put in too high, ovens too low, worktops at the wrong height. You couldn't adjust the adjustable worktops because they tiled down onto the worktop. I mean, everything was wrong. And this had gone on for so many years, and the wastage and the cost, I just thought was crazy. So I actually came up with a design concept that if you design to this design concept, then basically you have a set of units that you could take out without damaging, because they're not fixed to units either side. You can take out these units, keep the worktop, which has already got the hob and the sink in it, and then just put that worktop on brackets so that it could go up and down, and or the client at their own cost could pay to have a rise and fall put in, but still using the original worktop. And all that's changed is those units come out. It's a brilliantly simple system, which if you design and fit to that concept, can save maintenance a fortune, and particularly housing associations or property developers a fortune, because it means you can adapt a kitchen from a universally designed kitchen that anyone can use for specifically then for a wheelchair user.
Fantastic.
And you're not having to move fridges, ovens, dishwashers, base units, or anything else. There's just this one section.
Brilliant. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's finding stuff that's going to work for everybody, because tenants come and go and change. So it's
exactly. And again, it's crazy. I use the example of the housing association. What you don't want is, if a tenant moves on or dies, to have to rip that kitchen out to put in a new kitchen for the next tenant. If you design it correctly, it doesn't matter who the tenant's going to be. It is absolutely simple and possible to design a kitchen that virtually anyone can use.
And that's brilliant. And that's, it's been great chatting to you and kind of talking through all of these things, because there's so much practical advice that you've got there for people, and I think that's really helpful. We'll put some links into the show notes for people how to find you and to access some of the stuff that you've talked about, and we'll put the links to Document M in there as well, because if people aren't familiar with it, that goes through all the accessibility guide.
And there's a brilliant document called the Wheelchair Housing Design Guide, edition 3, that I think you can, I'll send you the link, but you get it through a housing association called Habinteg.
Okay, great.
And the Wheelchair Housing Design Guide edition 3 actually explains and debunks a lot of the issues and myths within Doc M, And it basically says, this is what you've got, this is the minimum of what you've got to do with DOCA, and this is what we'd like you to do, and this is best practice.
Oh, good.
But it explains all the different issues, and it's not just on kitchens, it's everything. You know, built environment, ramps, you know, windowsill heights, electrics, bathrooms, you name it. It's a really good document.
Yeah, that sounds really, really helpful for people. Thank you, Adam. Thank you ever so much for talking to us today. Thank you.
Lovely.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.